very sort of J.M. Barrie, E. Nesbitt sort of place.
They were not railway children to begin with. I don't suppose they'd ever thought about railways except as a means of getting to the pantomime, zoological gardens and Madame Tussauds. They were just ordinary suburban children, and they lived with their father and mother in an ordinary red brick fronted villa with coloured glass in the front door. These three lucky children always had everything they needed: pretty clothes, good fires, and a lovely nursery with heaps of toys. They also had a father who was just perfect, never cross, never unjust, and always ready for a game.
It was here at Prince of Wales Mansions that Noel was given his first toy theatre by his father. It was a fantasy world of living in the theatre, of imagining what he might be or what might happen. This park, Battersea Park, is sort of where he lived out those fantasies.
My guiding light to the theatre was the Daily Mirror, because it came out and said that attractive, talented and handsome boy wanted. And so Mother and I had a brisk conference, and we decided I was talented, handsome, moot point, but we'd better have a try. And so I went and gave an audition to a lady called Miss Lilla Field. Then I sang a song called Liza Ann from the Orchid, and there was no piano, and so Mother la-la'd the chorus for me to do the dance. You see, I had to do the dance. I got the job.
And you'd rehearsed that with her at home?
You bet I had, yes. The furniture pushed back.
I can remember. The months of November and December were filled for me with peculiar joys, so different from those of other boys. For other boys would be counting the days until end of term and holiday times, but I was acting in Christmas plays while they were taken to pantomimes. I didn't envy their Eton suits, their children's dances and Christmas trees. My life had wonderful substitutes for such conventional treats as these.
The first line I ever said on the stage was, "Crumbs, how exciting." I was trained when I was very young as a show-off, and I've continued triumphantly until this moment.
I think he'd found he'd got an easy target with me. He realized that I was going to laugh at him.
When did you first become aware of your own ability to write plays?
The party making a public debut for the first time this morning was little Jack O'Shea, who was born on the stroke of midnight at Dublin's Coombe Hospital. Jack weighed in at 4 pounds 6 ounces to proud parents'
trust that the subjects of the Queen had in her personally. They believed that she could fix things, that she could put things right that were wrong. And this was something rather noble, was it not? It's never been quite fulfilled by anybody else since, I think. But then it was just one old woman that people would write letters to and say, "Please, dear Majesty, get my son his place at school. He's been unjustly denied," and so on, around the world, to the magnitude of millions.
This was the image her politicians had so carefully contrived, a unifying symbol, mother to a global family. In 1897, that image found its perfect showcase. The Queen had ruled for 60 years. Her Diamond Jubilee would be a pageant without parallel.
The Diamond Jubilee was a celebration not just of the greatness of the Queen having been on the throne for 60 years, but a celebration of what was seen as the greatness of Victorian Britain and the greatness of the British Empire. It brought physically the British Empire home to people in Britain, in London, in a way that nothing else ever did.
The genius of the Jubilee was to involve colonial troops. The glamour beloved of the Queen was now to dazzle her subjects. Soldiers were brought from the Empire's every corner. The press fanned the mood of public excitement.
So I do remember them, and especially the people from Fiji with those They had orange. They dyed their hair orange. Fijis. They've given it up now. They're black, but they were dyed. They were wonderful. I remember that very well indeed.
But I went down to Hampton Court Palace, and there weren't so many there around the palace grounds, but they were all stationed in Bushy Park there. And one thing struck me there in particular. They were washing in a stream. I forget whether the stream was actually in Bushy Park or in the other grounds. But they had got a method of washing their clothes on a big stone set in the stream, and each one had his own call. Ah, ah, or all this sort of thing.
The country caught Jubilee fever and gave itself over to celebration. It was midsummer and the sun shone all day. Victoria was even given the credit for that. The papers called it Queen's weather.
My father said, "You're going to a party." I thought, how lovely going to a party, and I was so impressed. And we stood like statues and sang all 3 verses of God Save the Queen. And I think they wanted as many children's parties to sing it at the same time that day. Well, after we'd sung and the anthem and done what the teacher at school told us, stand very still and straight, look straight in front of you, not to right or left, and just imagine you see the Queen.
In London, more than 1 million people had gathered to see the Queen in person. Most had to be contented with a glimpse of her beneath her white parasol as her carriage passed by. Troops, thought to be the largest military force ever assembled in London, took part in the 6-mile procession. The loudest cheers greeted those from overseas.
It really was a microcosm of most of the world. People of every race, every language, every religion were brought in, and all of them were subjects of Queen Victoria, whose Jubilee it was. And even now, that would be quite an exciting thing to see, wouldn't it? I mean, it was as if the whole United Nations, say, every nation was to send a contingent of troops to some vast parade. We'd still be excited about it. It would still be a thrilling thing to see. And then, when you add to it, in 1897, the idea that all these people were subjects of your own nation, and loyal subjects, as everybody believed, and this was genuinely true, too. There was a genuinely emotional thrill to the thing, which I think was legitimate and which I'm quite sure you and I would share if we happened to be there.
We loved our friends and fought our enemies, and we enjoyed fighting our enemies. And if the British people begin to fight, they've just got to win. So we were proud of the Queen, we were proud of her possessions, proud of the British Empire.
The whole grand pageant had been in the name of one person, and the most popular Jubilee souvenir was a set of collectible cards illustrating the key events of her life, from those distant days at Kensington Palace, as if the last 78 years had been leading inexorably to this moment of climax.
It's easy to see the Diamond Jubilee as a triumph personally for Victoria, but I don't think she was altogether happy with the sort of monarchy which she was operating and embodying 60 years on from the time she became Queen. Victoria wanted monarchy to be powerful in government. By 1897, it isn't powerful in government. She wanted monarchy to be unostentatious in its style of living. She wasn't very interested in ceremony. She doesn't dress up for the Diamond Jubilee. So in a sense, I think the whole flummery of the Jubilee is in some ways anathema to her.
She appeared really like a kind of just a little old lady who almost might be sort of queuing up to get her pension, really, at the post office. But in an odd sort of way, it worked, or it was made to work, because it could then be written up in a way, oh well, in the midst of all this splendour, there was this sort of frail old lady all in black, and somehow it becomes more grand to be negative, doesn't it? Certainly when she died, the first thing that happened was it all went in reverse, and Queen Alexandra and King Edward VII couldn't put enough jewels on themselves. I mean, they were literally like walking Christmas trees on state occasions.
But despite the Queen's own concerns for the dignity and status of her crown, she was undoubtedly moved by the ovation she received on London streets that day. For her people, at least, the Jubilee had been a wild success. On June the 22nd, 1897, Britain was briefly intoxicated with an unforgettable self-confidence.
At some level in all our psyches, the idea that Britain used to be great and no longer is, that when they look back to the height of Britain's greatness, it is this kind of period when we had huge areas of map painted red, when our railways were running all over the world, when we were building something like 80% of the world's shipping. The sense that it's been downhill all the way ever since does, I think, reinforce a feeling that that was a great moment in the history of England, of Britain, of the Empire. And all of these are words that we now use much more hesitantly, don't we? But in those days they were the words that meant the future.
Of course, for us looking at the Diamond Jubilee is a very different matter from somebody in the crowd looking at the Diamond Jubilee, because they didn't know what was going to come, and we do know what came. And almost at once, looking back on it, it began to crumble, didn't it? Almost at once, this vast and marvellous illusion turned out to be an illusion after all. Almost immediately the Boer War happened, and there was the first real humiliation of the empire, which it never quite got over. And after that, of course, came the much worse tragedies, the First World War, which perhaps made the British feel that they weren't the masters of their fate, as they had fondly thought they would always be, and that things were not so certain, nothing was quite so bold and straight and square as the crowds watching the Diamond Jubilee going by had thought they were. And the rest is history.
But whatever the realities, the exhilaration of 1897 has proved hard to shake off. To this day, and ironically, in a hall dedicated by Victoria, the Diamond Jubilee's unwilling focus, to her husband, who would have been the Jubilee's fiercest critic, echoes of that distant euphoria can still be heard.
And stay with us here on BBC Two as Victorian Week continues with the Victorian Roadshow.